At the height of the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen, Great Britain and its allies were locked in a life-or-death struggle against the Axis powers. Nazi Germany had unleashed a lightning-fast, ruthless campaign across Europe. Its military operations were coordinated by radio. Messages transmitted in complex ciphers the German High Command believed were mathematically unbreakable. But far from the front lines, in a quiet corner of the English countryside, another battle was unfolding. It wasn't fought with tanks or bombers. It was fought with logic, mathematics, and relentless obsession. There, a small group of brilliant minds, backed by cutting-edge technology and driven by wartime urgency, began intercepting and deciphering Axis radio traffic. The intelligence they uncovered had the power to alter the course of World War II itself. This top-secret stream of decoded information would be classified under a single code name, Ultra, 1939. Europe stands on the brink of war. Since rising to power, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had dismantled Germany's democratic institutions and rapidly transformed the country into a war machine, preparing for territorial conquest. In the coming global conflict, radio communication would become the nervous system of modern warfare. Orders, troop movements, supply logistics, everything would travel through the air. And in wartime, every message had to be encrypted. Whoever could break the enemy's code would gain access to critical military secrets, force strength, operational plans, even advance warning of attacks. Throughout the 1930s, British cryptographers attempted to analyze German encryption systems, but with little success. Then came a breakthrough. In a forest clearing near Pyry, outside Warsaw, intelligence officials from France, Britain, and Poland met in secret. Using the code names X, Y, and Z, the three nations pooled their resources in a desperate attempt to crack Germany's military cipher system. Among the British delegation was an eccentric but brilliant scholar named Dilly Knox, one of Britain's leading cryptanalysts. Before the war, Knox had made his name reconstructing fragments of ancient Greek poetry from scraps of papyrus. Now, he faced a different kind of puzzle. Like his French and Polish counterparts, Knox was focused on a small, portable device used by the German armed forces. Its name was Enigma. On the surface, Enigma seemed simple. An operator typed a message on a keyboard. With each keystroke, a different letter lit up on a panel of lamps. This scrambled letter was written down and transmitted via Morse code. On the receiving end, another Enigma machine, configured identically, would reverse the process. The illuminated letters would reveal the original message. But beneath that apparent simplicity was a nightmare of electrical complexity. Inside the machine were three rotating rotors, each wired internally in a unique way. Every time a key was pressed, the rotors shifted position, altering the electrical pathways. The rotors themselves could be rearranged in different orders, multiplying the possible configurations. Then came the final layer, a plug board at the front of the machine that swapped pairs of letters before and after the rotor encryption. Altogether, Enigma could be configured in roughly 150 trillion different ways. While Dilly Knox understood the general principles behind Enigma, one critical piece was missing: the exact internal wiring of the rotors, and that secret, he hoped, would come from Poland. Facing the very real threat of a German invasion, Poland was willing to share its research in exchange for support from France and Britain. What the Poles revealed stunned their allies. The roots of Poland's breakthrough traced back to 1931, when a German named Hans Thilo Schmidt walked into the French embassy in Berlin and offered to sell stolen German cryptographic documents for money. The French accepted. Among the documents were code books and detailed operating instructions for Enigma. In London and Paris, officials concluded the material still wasn't enough to fully break the cipher. But in Warsaw, the threat from Germany felt immediate and existential. Polish intelligence handed the documents to three young mathematicians, Henryk Zygalski, Jerzy Różycki, and Marian Rejewski. It was Rejewski who made history. Working with only fragments of information from Schmidt, he transformed Enigma's mechanical processes into a system of mathematical equations and reconstructed the internal wiring of the machine's rotors. By 1933, Poland could read Enigma encrypted messages. By 1938, Polish codebreakers were deciphering up to 75% of intercepted German communications. For a moment, they had the upper hand. Then, suddenly, that advantage vanished. As Germany accelerated its rearmament program, it also upgraded Enigma. New operating procedures were introduced. 2 additional rotors were added to the system, and operators could now choose any 3 out of 5. That single change exploded the number of possible configurations, turning what had once been manageable into something vastly more complex. For Polish intelligence, the breakthrough they had worked so hard to achieve suddenly collapsed. The cipher was unreadable again, and with a German invasion no longer a question of if but when, Poland made a historic decision. It would hand over everything it knew to Britain and France. Dilly Knox was astonished by the scale of the Polish achievement. What Rejewski and his colleagues had accomplished under constant threat was nothing short of extraordinary. Knox accepted their findings with deep gratitude. Now, Britain finally had a fighting chance against Enigma, and preparations began in earnest. Just north of London, in the quiet town of Bletchley, something unusual was happening. On the grounds of a Victorian estate called Bletchley Park, construction crews were pouring concrete, laying telephone cables, and installing new electrical lines. Temporary wooden buildings, soon known as huts, were going up across the property. At the same time, an unusual group of men and women began arriving. Linguists, chess champions, mathematicians, classicists, people who looked more like university professors than wartime personnel. Their mission was classified. They were cryptanalysts from Britain's government code and cipher school, GC and CS, the agency responsible for breaking enemy communications. With war looming, Captain William Ridley of the Secret Intelligence Service oversaw the quiet relocation of London's code-breaking operation to Bletchley Park. The estate was far enough from the capital to be safe from German bombing, yet well connected by rail and telephone lines. The move was given an innocuous cover name, Captain Ridley's Shooting Party. Behind the facade, Bletchley Park was becoming the nerve center of Britain's code-breaking war. At its head stood Commander Alistair Denniston, a veteran of World War I code-breaking efforts. Calm and methodical, Denniston had the temperament needed to manage an increasingly eccentric staff. At the time, the school employed roughly 150 people. The atmosphere felt almost collegiate, so much so that employees jokingly claimed GC and CS stood for Golf, Cheese and Chess Society. But everyone understood what was coming. If war broke out, intercepted German communications would pour in by the thousands. Code breaking would have to move from a scholarly exercise to an industrial-scale operation. Denniston began searching for what he called professor types. Fortunately, he didn't have to look far. Oxford lay to the west, Cambridge to the east. Both universities became prime recruiting grounds. Among the early arrivals were mathematician Gordon Welchman, whose organizational innovations would transform operations at Bletchley, and a young Cambridge scholar named Alan Turing, whose theoretical work would one day lay the foundation for modern computer science. By the summer of 1938, Bletchley Park had a location, a skeleton team, and a growing list of recruits. Then came the Munich Agreement. Britain and France conceded territory to Hitler in an attempt to preserve peace, temporarily easing the immediate threat of war. For a moment, the crisis seemed to pass. The men and women of Captain Ridley's shooting party returned to their London offices. Exactly 1 year later, they would be back, this time for good. Britain was now at war. Mobilization began immediately. Young men were drafted into military service. Older men and women filled factory floors. Children from major cities were evacuated to the countryside in anticipation of German air raids. And at Bletchley Park, the Government Code and Cipher School officially relocated its operations to the estate. The stream of intercepted German radio messages was growing by the day. The real battle with Enigma was about to begin. The pressure was mounting. Across Britain and throughout the wider British Empire, radio intercept stations known as Y stations were scanning the airwaves around the clock. Their operators swept the spectrum for the sharp, rhythmic pulses of German Morse transmissions. It was delicate work. Signals drifted across frequencies. Weather distorted reception. Static and overlapping broadcasts drowned out fragments of messages. But when a transmission was captured, it was rushed to Bletchley Park for decoding. And there wasn't just one enigma to break. The German Army, Luftwaffe, and Kriegsmarine each operated on separate encrypted networks. Each network used its own daily machine settings. Every one of them had to be attacked individually. To keep track, British codebreakers assigned color labels. Army traffic became green. Air Force networks were red and brown. Soon there were so many separate networks that they ran out of colors and began naming them after animals, insects, and plants. Inside Bletchley Park, the strain was obvious. There were too few people, too little space, too many messages. Cryptanalysts worked in rotating shifts, 24 hours a day. The main mansion quickly overflowed, and operations spilled into hastily built wooden huts scattered across the estate. Simple structures with bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling and blackout curtains drawn tight at night. In the beginning, Enigma was attacked by hand, pencils, graph paper, endless columns of permutations. The work demanded more than intelligence. It required extraordinary patience and almost obsessive concentration. Fortunately, the British weren't starting from zero. They inherited a crucial breakthrough from the Polish mathematicians, a vulnerability hidden inside German operating procedures. Each day, German Enigma operators received instructions specifying which rotors to use, the order in which to place them, the ring settings that shifted the internal wiring, the plugboard connections that swapped letter pairs. Finally, for every individual message, the operator selected a unique 3-letter message key, a starting position for the rotors. But here was the problem. The recipient needed that message key to decrypt the transmission, and it had to be sent securely. So German operators followed protocol. First, they set the rotors to the daily starting position. Then they typed their chosen 3-letter message key. Next, they reset the rotors to match that key and typed the actual message. To guard against radio interference, German procedure required the operator to transmit the message key twice. That repetition, meant as a safeguard, was the fatal flaw, because before encryption, those two 3-letter groups were identical, and that duplication gave Allied cryptanalysts something priceless, a foothold, a crack in Enigma's armor. It wasn't enough to break the system outright, but it was a way in. In January 1940, Bletchley Park achieved its first major breakthrough. Enigma was finally cracked. The Allies could read the daily keys used by the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe. Orders, reports, and operational details were intercepted and decrypted in near real time. A staggering intelligence success that the Nazis had no idea about. But the victory was short-lived. Just 4 months later, the Germans unexpectedly tightened security and changed their operating procedures. Overnight, many of the methods inherited from the Polish cryptanalysts ceased to work. Bletchley Park was blind again, right when Hitler was preparing a devastating strike. Meanwhile, as battles raged across France, a newcomer at Bletchley Park made a breakthrough. John Herivel, a 21-year-old mathematician, had just joined the operation when a flash of insight struck. Perhaps the way into Enigma wasn't through cryptographic weakness, but through human error. Herivel imagined himself in the place of an Enigma operator, starting a shift at dawn and tasked with urgently transmitting a critical message. Tired, stressed, or just lazy, the operator might fail to set the rotors to truly random starting positions before sending the message. This meant the initial rotor settings could match, or nearly match, the ring settings. Herivel's intuition revealed a new weakness in Enigma, giving the cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park an entry point. On May 22, 1940, the team applied the so-called Herivel Tip and successfully decrypted the Luftwaffe's Enigma traffic, codenamed Red. This network remained penetrable almost until the end of the war. Yet even with these cryptographic victories, the Allies were clearly losing the war. Britain was in its darkest hour. On July 16, 1940, Hitler issued Directive No. 16, demanding plans for an invasion of the British Isles. But before Germany could launch Operation Sea Lion, it needed to neutralize Britain's air defenses. That summer, the Luftwaffe clashed with the Royal Air Force over southern England. Britain had a few advantages, but the biggest was Bletchley Park's Hut 6. Thanks to the decrypts, the British knew the Luftwaffe's flight routes and targets in advance, enabling ambushes against enemy bombers and giving ground crews crucial time to prepare. Bletchley Park intelligence also allowed the British to jam and distort German radio navigation signals, sending bombers off course. The Luftwaffe suffered defeat. Even though the invasion threat passed, Britain's situation remained perilous. Hitler dominated the continent. The United States refused to intervene. The Soviet Union and Germany avoided direct conflict, for now. And a new crisis loomed at sea. German U-boats were hunting vital supply convoys. The Battle of the Atlantic could decide the fate of the Western Front. Cracking the German naval codes became Bletchley Park's top priority, a race to save Britain and protect its lifelines.